Welcome back to the Gaming News Canada show. As always, I'm your host, Steve McAllister. We have an awful lot to cover in this episode, so it only made sense to bring back our regular GNCS panelists, Amanda Brewer and Phil Gray. Hey, Amanda, it's great to see you as you prepare to head across the pond to Lisbon for next week's SBC conference.
Yes, thank you to Air Canada and its pilots union for deciding to pick the safer option and putting a whole bunch of people, out of pocket. But yes, it's great to be back, and I've been following all the different guests you've been interviewing over the summer, Steve. So really happy to be here with Phil and yourself, and let's see what we can get into.
Yeah, and Phil, I'll always apologize for taking you out the golf course for an hour to do this. So there will be a free lunch down the road whenever our paths cross again.
I'm going to hold you to that, Stephen. And yes, to echo Amanda, I've been following a lot of your podcasts and some great stuff out there. Really good.
Yeah, well, maybe start. I mean, it's funny. I can't remember the last time we chatted. I think it was probably in July when we had you both on the podcast. But it's we've had a couple of guests on the show, and it kind of equated to the sports calendar where at one time there were definitive off seasons in sports, whether it was baseball or hockey or football. Amanda, we really haven't seen that in the gaming industry this summer. I mean, we tried to cut back with the one podcast a week, and there just seemed to be a never-ending torrent of press releases and M&A activity. And again, I maybe get yours and Phil's perspective. Is that unusual, or is this kind of just where the industry is now, especially in the regulated environment?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think it's the new normal. If you read, I love reading earnings and more. I start my day with that snarky email that lands in my inbox. And I think, especially operators that are over here in the US that are heavily in the sportsbook states, I think they're finding the landscape incredibly difficult. You're seeing the bumpy ride that ESPN Bet is having right now. FanDuel and DraftKings don't seem like they can get toppled from the 1 and 2 position. So I think a lot of mergers, acquisitions, operators are trying to buy smaller startups that think will give them some sort of scale or, better customer or product service. So I do think this will be the new normal for the foreseeable future. This is a heavily tech-based industry as well, and there are always going to be innovations on that side of things. So yeah, I think, good news for you, Steve, and possibly for Phil and myself too, that there will be a lot to talk about for many years to come.
Yeah, Phil?
Well, I'm a bookie. Nobody wants to hear from me anymore. Well, no, as Amanda was saying, just the proliferation of tech companies right now, feed providers and technical service providers as well. I think you're starting to see a retraction in as we were talking about last year. I was referring to, as Amanda said, you've got 1 or 2 or 3 really big operations, and they're acquiring, a lot of the smaller ones, and you're starting to see, a regression in the amount of different options. I would say they're still out there, obviously, but it's slowly contracting for sure. As far as the landscape for sports books, especially in sports betting, I mean, such a wide array now of what you can bet on and when you can bet it. Specifically, in in-play as well as pregame. Thousands of derived markets, very hard, very tough to manage, and that's why you're seeing some books have difficulties with that, with having third-party providers managing those. You see a lot of problems that are starting to rear its head. As I was saying, a couple of years ago, where we'll get into this later, where all of a sudden regulators are looking at limits. You can't just run an operation anymore like we did for the last 30 years and without any oversight and do what you want. Government has stepped in.
Yeah, and we're recording this podcast on Monday morning, and Amanda, we're already seeing, I think Adam Greenblatt, the CEO of BetMGM, came out last week and said that I think live betting on the first week of the NFL season was up, I think either 41 or 71% year over year, and GeoComply put out its data from week 1, and again, just massive double-digit increases in live betting. So, Phil, feels a little bit like ticket prices in sports, and people keep saying the ticket prices can't go any higher, and yet they do. And we're seeing that again. We're 6 years now post PASPA, and we just see the industry continue to grow in the U.S. in terms of legal wagering and especially live betting.
Yeah, and Phil will know this too. Live in-game, it was always kind of like the holy grail that everyone was striving for, in addition to being able to do, your parlays and your pre-games and all the rest of it. But like the live in-game betting is, what a lot of the operators in the industry have talked about as being kind of the ultimate seamless fan experience. So you can be sitting at home on your couch, you can be sitting, in your seat in a stadium, and you can be putting usually micro bets. So they're not always, big money bets, but micro bets just on the next, 5 minutes of action on the field, and that is what they've seen as, kind of where they want the industry to be able to head to. But, just touching on some of the discussions you, Phil, and I were having just ahead of this podcast, where the RG, issues start to kind of raise their heads, and, is AI kind of pushing fans in that direction? Because, there's a whole big now, kind of school of thought around how AI can help the industry, because there's a lot of good use of AI on the RG side, but is it also looking to help, some customers, get more preferred picks sent their way or tailored offers sent their way to kind of further entice them to stay on the app and bet more money? So, lots to talk about.
Yeah, Phil, I'll let you put on your trader's hat for this one.
Yeah, well, that's what Amanda was just referring to, with AI, and enticing, choose my words carefully here, an increase in revenue for live betting. Let's say that. What we're seeing though, Stephen, it was, what has come to North America now with in-play live betting, which was in Europe years and years ago, is the advancement in technology and third-party service providers that you can now, offer in-play on just, just so many markets, especially with micro betting now and the takeoff of that. Like Simple Bet just acquired by DraftKings, so that's going to completely expand their offering. What the problem with in-play, I think, in some of, because it almost comes like a casino game for people. It's a click win, click lose, and it's very that can be very enticing to a segment of the betting population. And the problem with having third-party service providers like that is you really don't have a lot of control as the book. Your provider is doing that. So if there's errors or there's limit questions and stuff like that, then it comes back to the book, and then you have to deal with the client. It's not the provider that's dealing with the client; it's the book that has to deal with the client. And there's a simple way around a lot of that. Is just in event limits. I've had this discussion with many operators. Why would you be offering? Why would you allow someone to get $10,000 down on next first down? And I don't understand some of the philosophy of that. I think it's an oversight on the books and why they're doing it. Certainly you want to increase revenue, absolutely, but you leave yourself exposed to a certain segment of the betting population that you shouldn't be. So there's a way, it's going to be addressed in the next couple of years, again, with the government involvement right now. But it's an interesting time, and it's only going to get busier.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit later before we let you both go about the U.S. Safe Bet Act that was proposed last week by a couple of U.S. senators. But let's get to the big story still in Canada, and that's obviously what's going on in Alberta, or what's not going on in Alberta. And really interesting, man. I did reach out to the Office of Communications folks at Dale Nally, the Minister of Service Alberta and Red Tape Reduction on Friday, and still waiting to hear back. Really wanted to get an update on where things stand with the industry. And again, see a lot of stuff on social media this summer. We've seen a little bit of reporting. It feels like people throwing darts at the board a little bit. Saw one tweet a week or so ago that they were looking at an early spring launch for the regulated market in Alberta. I heard last week someone mentioned again before the Grey Cup. I guess maybe we'll just start, man. Like, what are you hearing?
Yeah, I've heard a lot of the same rumors. And in fact, the Canadian Gaming Association sent out a reminder to members just last week, just reminding them that much like when Ontario opened, official information was coming only from the Government of Ontario or the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario. That was where the official information was coming from. That's where official information will be coming from Alberta, either the Government of Alberta or perhaps AGLC. If it's not coming from either of those sources, then, take it with a huge grain of salt, and don't start making plans based on that. I know it's been a little bit of a source of frustration right now because operators are getting calls from certain organizations within Alberta suggesting that, if they partner with them, they'll have an easier time getting approved for a license, or, it'll just be an easier access route for them if, they do X, Y, or Z. Nothing of that is legitimate. As we've kind of had to point out to Alberta in the last week, that there's this big market called Brazil that's ahead of them. And, given the population, and given the interest of operators, there's a lot of plans already in place to get into Brazil. So Alberta can't be saying in the early days of September, it will be sometime between, like Grey Cup and the spring. Like, operators can't make plans like that. And there's also the issue of we still don't know what the tax rate is. We still don't know what the regulatory standards are. And we still don't know what their conduct and manage model will look like. So we know it's going to be an open market. So that's great. But those other three issues are significant ones for operators. And nobody's going to make any promises, to come in until they get concrete answers to those questions. So, the hope is, over this fall, there can be some plans made, and then the government of Alberta can start communicating more, formal roadmap, so operators can start making plans on their ends. But it's the classic, in the absence of any official information, there's a lot of rumor and innuendo that starts, getting spread. But right now we're in the same position we were when the minister was out at the summit in June. So there's been no more official information since then.
Phil, Amanda makes a great point about Brazil and about, it's not like you just turn a switch on to open a legal sports book in a province or a state or any other jurisdiction. I mean, I'm sure you have firsthand experience with that.
Yeah, no, I mean, reading up on what's required in Brazil right now and what they're doing. Wow, that it's some operators are saying, it's not even worth it. Obviously not the really big ones, but there's some. It's just and what it was, they want £4.5 million as the licensing fee in Brazil, which to a sports book is, you want that in 20, so here you go, sort of thing. But I'm talking to an operator who's going through the regulation and licensing process with Alberta right now. It seems to me that it's very akin to what I went through with Ontario, which was the better part of 7 months to check all the boxes. It's very, very resource intensive on the tech side, as well as some of the other departments to go through the document and provide proof that you adhere to all the processes. I was speaking to him because I'm working for a media company that's looking to provide some media buys, and his response to me is it's not even on our landscape yet. So talk to me in a few months. So take from that what you will, whether or not they're going to actually make it in 2024 in Alberta. I
don't know how that's possible.
Yeah, I don't think so. So I went through, as I say, the Ontario process, and it's because you still have to run your book in your operation in the rest of where you are, and that it has its challenges on a daily basis. So you have to, you have to take part of your tech team and part of the rest of your team to go through the documents and again provide proof that you're doing everything. That's just not a matter of checking boxes. They want. So it seems to me that Alberta wants the same thing that Ontario had, a lot of proof of what you have and what you do and how you do it, and documented proof, which again it's there's only so many hours in the day, and you have to run the rest of your business. So I think Amanda's right. No way, 2024.
Hey man, the Kinder Group brought you in to launch the Unibet brand in Ontario. I mean, again, you were someone that had were really deep in the weeds of the Ontario market launching. But just what were the major pain points for you in that role?
You know what? Getting the license wasn't difficult. And again, if you're an operator with a license in Ontario, you're an operator in good standing. From what I still understand is it looks like the AGCO side of things, those standards are going to get imported into Alberta. So that would stand to reason that operators with a license here would get the license in Alberta. And for the most part, operators are pretty happy with the risk-based, outcomes-based approach AGCO has taken. Where there were sort of bigger kind of challenges was on the iGaming Ontario side, because under the conduct and manage, and remember, when you're the first province to try something, sometimes you're going to put a lot of insurance. I'm using that word deliberately, insurance around you just to make sure that as you're feeling your way through things, it's not going to tilt sideways. So, we're, I think, the only jurisdiction in the world that requires operators to carry proof of insurance as a way of indemnifying, the government against anything that could possibly go wrong. We've got a lot of audit requirements. There's just a lot on the IGO side of things, and I think that's where operators are kind of hoping that if Alberta does decide to follow the AGCO side of things on regs, they might try and kind of eliminate some of the heavier duty items on the IGO side that they're finding are a little bit not conducive to a fully successful commercial operation.
Yeah, audit requirements are massive and provide, you have to provide a lot of proof of documentation, and server analysis and, server capability and as well as staff capability. And that it's not just I don't know if would they Manuel, you would know that better. They may say Sportsbook Y is already, regulated and licensed in Ontario. Is that enough for Alberta that you can just go and say, hey, I'm applying for my license, and they're not going to require any proof or anything? Because you're in Ontario, so you're fine. Come on in.
It's a great question, because what some of the stuff I've been raising with like Troy Ross and Paul Burns is like, say it's the Phil Gray Sportsbook, and Phil Gray Sportsbook has a license in Ontario. It's been in there for a couple of years. It's doing okay. It would like to go into Alberta. Well, is the Phil Gray Sportsbook going to have to pay 2 times RG check? If you're RG checked already in Ontario, can you carry that into Alberta? How about all your compliance and all your insurance? Are you going to have to buy double insurance for Alberta? Are you going to have to do 2 times the audits? Are you going to are your fees going to just double for the same kind of service that's being provided to you? So who absolutely knows? And that is certainly something that operators would push back very, very hard against, because they'd say, I'm already doing the audit in Ontario. It's the exact same back-end technology platform providers. So, can't you just accept the proof of the audit as proof of what I'm doing in Alberta? So, yeah. I mean, that is kind of the hope. But again,
But that's the question. You would think, why wouldn't they do that? So my server security and capacity, and my audit check and everything, and they're all crossed. And can I not just come into Alberta now, or is Alberta going to go, well, no, send us that documentation again? Well, that's a lengthy process to go through that again and provide.
And it for some of the smaller books too, like when I was doing some of my operator interviews back in the winter, some of the smaller books feel like they're in a never-ending audit cycle. They're not large enough to be able to farm it off or, to bring in more resources. They're just in continuous audit cycles. But I take heart from the fact that Alberta is a proudly, non-red tape or, proudly in favor of red tape reduction. And I can't see them embracing a whole bunch of, red tape just because Ontario does it. I see Alberta heading in the opposite direction. But I think also it's one of the outstanding things that hasn't quite happened yet. Full credit to Minister Nally for starting with consultation with his land-based industry and his First Nations. But the wider industry, to my understanding, hasn't really been consulted yet. And I think that's something that will get tabled fairly soon, because if, the whole thing with Ontario opening is we've talked for years about first mover advantage. All right. So Ontario's open. They have really good standards. Any other province that goes, it would get harder and harder, especially if Alberta kind of adopts the Ontario standards. It would get harder and harder for any other province that follows to then go and write their own standards, wholesale. The conduct and manage is trickier because every province interprets that differently currently. So the hope is that for some things, there'll be at least maybe some kind of harmonization of standards, as more provinces open across Canada. So you're not having to repeat things per province when they're basically asking for the same thing or something that's 75, 80, 90% similar. So this is a kind of, I think, with the third province hopefully opening at some point in time before I die, I think this is where you see the conversations needing to go, because then it just becomes also about, allowing operators to come in and be commercially successful. And how can they do that if it's just admin requirement after admin requirement after, heavy duty compliance requirements. So
interesting though that Alberta has included First Nation in the discussion, because Ontario did not. And I know there's one. I mean, they would be minor stakeholders, some of the First Nation interests in Alberta, but I know one very major stakeholder that would be very interesting to see what happens with them.
A couple of other issues I want to bring up here, Amanda, just on the cost of business, cost of doing business theme. It seems that the tax rate could be a potentially contentious issue, and here in Ontario, I think it's a 20% tax rate on wagers. Have you heard anything about that? And I guess just from a starting point, is anything above 20%, is that a red flag for operators who want to come into the province?
I think so. And, I know a lot of the conversations with the minister leading up to, now have really been about that 20%, and that being what operators consider to be a reasonable tax rate and one that they will not push back against. Any other province after Ontario is smaller in terms of population. So raising a tax rate when you're dealing with smaller population, which means smaller customer base, which means smaller revenue pool, it really doesn't make sense to raise the tax. But the other thing too about Ontario is those of us who've been in this market for a while, we talk about what the true tax rate is in Ontario. So yes, it's 20%. Every dollar you make, 20% is going over to IGO, but then you're adding in AGCO regulatory recovery fees, mandatory RG check, all the compliance costs for all the audits and all the rest of it. So that tax rate, in fact, for operators starts to get probably north of 25%. In Ontario, it's probably, 26, 27% when you put that all in. So, in talking with Paul, I said, the only way Alberta would be able to justify a slightly higher tax rate than Ontario if it was an all-in tax. So you're not paying a single penny for anything else. It's like a 22%, but that's everything included in it. But that would have to be a conversation with the operators, and they'd have to see if they'd agree to that.
Phil, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, we talked about this a few months ago. I mean, we saw the trend in the States towards just unreasonable tax rates, which some books were still even willing to pay. But as Amanda said, I mean, Ontario set the line there, and I think she hit the nail on the head there. Absolutely, it's all the additional costs. So if Alberta was to come and say, okay, give us 22.5%, and you don't have to pay anything else, books would be fine with that. But I don't. It's going to be. You see the trend in the States, with a lot of the states, going up to absorbent amounts, 40, 50%. My gosh. And FanDuel or DraftKings might pay that, but certainly, Phil Gray Sportsbook ain't paying that.
Right.
Yeah, I know some people have pointed to New York, but I mean, they're all consortiums. They've all banded together, right? Yeah. So you've got Group A, Group B, Group C, Group D, because that tax rate is not sustainable for any operator, even if you're FanDuel or DraftKings.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
Hey, two more questions on this topic, Amanda. First one is. Obviously, part of the consultative process in Ontario was that OLG wasn't going to be actively involved in the regulatory regime, and that IGO was created as a conduct and manage party for the regulated environment in Ontario. Have you heard anything? Again, I just wonder, will Dale Nally's office kind of take that AGCO IGO model and just try to mirror that in the province, or is there pushback from AGLC where they would like to have a bigger role?
You know what? So they do have a regulator in Alberta, which is AGLC. They're also the operator of Play Now. And Alberta has a chance to make a model on the conduct and manage side that works for them. I know, part of the problem is their ownership of Play Now. It has been suggested they could easily just sell that, and that would kind of take care of that. Operators aren't going to be willing to have any of their data, financial, customer, platform, any of that data being shared with a competitor that is government run. The minister could decide to take part of AGLC and create a Chinese wall and, hire some staff or turn some staff into the regulator and the conductor and manager just for the online market that's going to come in. They could start up a whole new sort of bureau within Service Alberta if they want. I mean, there's different options to get around this, but I think, there could definitely be a role for AGLC in this. They just have to figure out sort of the Play Now conundrum that they're going to face, because operators will have the same opinion of that as they did of OLG.
Hey, Phil, last question on this, and I'll start with you on this one. And there was a Ottawa think tank, Cardis, that came out with a report, I think earlier this month, it's warning the government of Alberta against expanding online gambling in the province, and they outlined the harms associated with the increase of online gambling. Hoping that maybe you had a chance to read that report, or you're familiar with it. Just again, the idea that bringing in a regulated industry would lead to increased problems.
Well, I mean, we've had this discussion for a number of years, have we not? I mean, I mean, it's here. It's a fabric. I mean, it's a fabric society, and it has been for a long time. And as a recreational form of entertainment, certainly it is. It's something that's there, and it's enjoyable for a lot of people. You go to it, answer to addiction. I mean, look, I was in Toronto last week. I went into a Circle K, I think, Steve, they're called, or something. And there, what do we have? What we have? All shiny and new, right on the front stands there. Bottles of wine, beer. I never thought I'd see that in Ontario. That was something. What are you going to do? Ban it? I mean, because the black market. I worked in the black market for a long time. Gray market, as we like to call it. It's there. It's always going to be there. And as as Amanda is so eloquently over the years, made a proponent of regular gaming. She's right. I mean, bring it into some regulations, some oversight, and some process where the responsible gaming industry is slowly evolving, and it's getting there. I think it's there. It's not going away. So why wouldn't you bring it into some sort of governmental jurisdiction and have some control over it? Gray market is never going to go away, as was seen in some of the reports there, because there's some. It's still, the regulated industry is still evolving and kind of getting there. So why I didn't read that report, but I mean that's an age old question. I mean look and I'll be quite honest. Look, I operated here in Quebec with a book for a couple of decades, and we were a pretty fair book, and we had a lot of oversight and a lot of process, and we were regularly accused of being criminals and money launderers and, financing terrorism and, ruining people's lives. But you know what? I could come here in Quebec and go to a low-income area into a bar, and what was in there, operated by the government, 30 VLT machines, and what was at the front door? An ATM machine. So, it's been a long question, but I think we're getting there here in North America. It's
man. Yeah,
So
man.
the CGA actually posted a response on its industry page. So I'll encourage anyone to go and look at it, because Cardis is actually a faith-based think tank, which is our favorite kind of think tank, one that, you know, uses the good word of the Lord to justify our existence, you know, as an industry. And, you know, we kind of said that we find it incredible that any organization would purport that a black or illegal version of an industry is preferable to regulation. And then Cardis was trying to debunk the information, the data that Paul and others were using when C218 was up for debate to change the criminal code for single event sports betting. And we had to point out to them that how is it that they thought it was possible that any gray market operator was opening their books up and submitting data so that we could have an entirely accurate picture of what was going on in the country. Like, that's just like ludicrous.
Yeah,
so, we did push back pretty hard to their position. We don't think they have any place in this discussion whatsoever.
No, they don't. And again, you can, you know, bring it down to the most simplistic version of everything that's happening. There's never, ever, you know, I've been in this industry 25 years, ever been the kind of scrutiny on sports books in North America and the way people, you know, gamble and play ever. Like, not even close. So to suggest that, you know, that this is a bad thing is ridiculous. As Amanda said, they're a bunch of fakes.
Yeah, we said, you know, we celebrate any province that is trying to bring this activity into the light, and what we need to push back against is any suggestion that this activity belongs in the shadows, like, full stop.
Yeah, ridiculous.
Yeah, the Canadian Gaming Association did post their statement on LinkedIn, and we'll include for our listeners. We'll include a link to that.
I didn't read it.
In the podcast. So
Paul and I were debating if we should use the hashtag God bless at the end of it, but we're like, no.
Post it, Steve. Let me make a response. They'll love me.
Yeah, we'll have to get the Gaming News Canada legal teams teed up, Phil. That happens.
We need to vet your statement, Phil.
And you definitely will not be getting your lunch when that happens. Hey, I want to go just quickly in Ontario, and since we had you both on the podcast, the news came out that Martha Otten's going to retire as executive director of IGO at the end of the year. Amanda, maybe just a couple of questions. I guess you know what you think Martha's legacy will be in that role. And then the second part is what type of skill set should AGCO and IGO and anyone else who's going to be involved in hiring Martha's replacement, what is the skill set they should be looking for to continue to move this industry forward?
So Martha, I think, will be remembered as a bit of a trailblazer. I mean, it's not for nothing that she was made executive director of a brand new agency that was created specifically for this industry. So she will always be remembered as, you know, somebody who helped, you know, launch this after years of lobbying, years of fighting to have a regulated market in Ontario. So for her to kind of, you know, have that notoriety and that respect from the industry for all of her hard work, very few people who could have created something and something so, you know, in some respects complicated. You're trying to interpret, conduct, and manage for a brand new industry that's coming in. And if you've ever seen an IGO operating agreement, there's a lot in there. They had to consider an awful lot before, you know, our government felt comfortable allowing this market to launch. And for Martha to have spearheaded that, and I think as a woman in this industry too, thankfully, we're seeing more and more women in senior positions, but Martha's certainly, in my opinion, a trailblazer. And she really deserves to enjoy her retirement. And I hope she feels very proud of all of her accomplishments, because she should. In terms of who they replace, that's a more interesting question. I think it depends on the direction that the board of iGaming Ontario wants to see that division go. I think that it will be someone who will be able to take what has been established for the first 3 years, but also decide if now is the time that there has to be a directional change for IGO, especially knowing that there could be another market that's opening, and looking closely at, you know, the work that they do, and if there's a way that standards can be harmonized for future provinces that are, following Ontario's lead. So I think it will be an interesting time, for candidates, but, ultimately, also seeing what the board thinks needs to be done too, because it's ultimately the board who will hire the replacement.
Hey, Phil, do you have anything to add on top of that?
Where do I send my resume?
I do want to. Yeah, I think, Amanda, the couple of the obviously issues are, there was an announcement earlier this summer about IC 360 and ICYMI are going to create a centralized self-exclusion program, and there was a pretty in-depth article in the Toronto Star 3 or 4 weeks ago, on the problems that have cropped up from not having that program. And again, that's something that you've talked about, I think, almost going back to our days of doing this podcast on Twitter Spaces, the need for a centralized self-exclusion program. And the other thing, and Martha's been very honest about this, we had her on the podcast during the Canadian Gaming Summit back in June, and that just getting access to data and having the tools in place to turn around data more quickly. And just to add to what you mentioned about Martha's legacy, Amanda, I think what can't get lost too is that this regime was created during COVID, when people were working remotely, and there were certainly challenges in just getting the normal day-to-day work done in that environment during the pandemic. But I think there probably is. IGO and IC360 and ICYMI, when we had them on the podcast, didn't want to commit to a timeline to get this self-exclusion program up and running. But I would think there's a bit of a time crunch. Amanda, would you not agree?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those, realities of you don't know what you don't know. This was the province-wide self-exclusion was something that was promised to operators, in April of, the launch year. And, the original timeline was something that was going to be ready by Q4, Q1, the following year. And we're way past that. It's not trying to find my best way to say this. There is a lawsuit that was launched in year one as well against a whole bunch of operators. I don't know who the whole list is, but just assume it's like most of them who are operating. And it has everything to do with self-exclusion and operators not doing enough to self-exclude customers. So you can kind of see where the problem is as well. In that, that safety net that I always talked about, and, AGCO has put a lot of standards in that operators have to follow, operators go above and beyond. But also that kind of just, the bottom part of that safety net that was missing. So it was really good news to see that they finally got the RFP out and they've made the selection. But I don't have any other inside information on, what kind of timeline or, when we could possibly expect to see something. It's not going to be, an easy, it's not just like an API connection and off you go. There's a lot that's going to have to be considered for this. So, good news that it's coming. Unfortunately, it's taken 3 years for us to get to this point. And the hope is that, as we're still waiting for this, we don't have more people that, shouldn't be gambling and have kind of slipped through the cracks a little bit and, are going to have, challenges because of that. So yeah, as much as I can hope for something, it's that we can get this up and running as fast as possible.
And Phil, it just feels again like there's a role, a bigger role for the provincial government to play here in Ontario, where we're earmarking some of that tax revenue that's coming in from this industry and putting against problem gambling and being very open and transparent about putting resources against that at a time where, and again, we've talked about this ad nauseum in this on this platform that mental health is a huge problem in society today.
Yeah, I would go. I mean, I think this is kind of bureaucracy and red tape running at its finest. This should be an operational requirement, and it's not that hard to do. If someone calls into your sportsbook, listen, I have a gambling problem, I want to close my account, or I need to take a break, or whatever, that should be automatically through, raised through a customer service department to a manager. Okay, yeah, your account Well, thank you. Here, you're paid out. Goodbye. And then there is, there's a very easy sharing platform for regulated, licensed sportsbooks in Ontario. Said, hey, he came into Sportsbook X, said he has a gambling problem, doesn't want to gamble anymore. All right, he's on the list, so he can't go to Sportsbook Y, he can't go to Sportsbook Z. It's so simple to do. It's a revenue question for some sportsbooks. I don't agree. I've seen that before. Timeout. The guy calls in. He says, I have a gambling problem. Okay, well, we'll put you in a timeout for 3 months. And then he calls in, 2 months later. Well, all right, it's been 2 months. You're okay now. And this is such a simple operational requirement, and should be mandatory for sportsbooks. Absolutely mandatory, and shared information that you have, and because it's not that prevalent. You're not going to get that many people calling in for it, and that's just a report that's submitted to the government every month to show that you're living up to it. I don't see the need to create another whole bureaucratic system and another company and everything to provide this. To me, it's just so very simplistic. But again, it comes down to the onus is on the operators. I don't think it's on the government.
Two more topics before we let you both go. And Phil, you mentioned revenue, and you mentioned limiting a little bit earlier, and I want to get into that quickly. And representatives for the major U.S. sportsbooks joined the Massachusetts Gaming Commission last week for a roundtable discussion, and the operators did defend that bookmaking practice, which is quite controversial, of restricting how much sharp bettors. Yeah, again, just maybe you can, just for our listeners, kind of just explain the practice. Understand again that everybody that listens to this show isn't an expert on betting, isn't a sharp bettor. Just the whole idea of limiting and your thoughts on it.
Well, there was a great quote now. Sportsbooks now are they're accountants, they're not bookmakers. So it becomes completely the bottom line. And again, you have right now, you don't have a lot of butts in the chairs. Everything is on feed providers and on service providers. So you don't have a lot of oversight of that. So what they're doing is completely bottom line, and there's no. You stay with the market price. And somebody bets against the market price, and you're hanging something when you didn't want to. Well, we're going to get rid of him. Is he sharp? I don't know. I always hate that word, sharp. There's some advantage bettors, but you might beat me 1 week, I'll get you out the next week. It becomes, and it's a great quote from Billy Walters in that article you sent there. The vast majority of these people that are throwing out haven't done anything wrong. If you violate a rule or your money's dirty, fine, that's great. But a guy who bet you on a ball game because a quarterback was out and didn't move your line, you're going to throw him out for that? No, you need to throw out the guy that's running your sports book. And I've had this conversation with a couple of major operators. There becomes, managing your liability and your exposure on certain lines. If I'm hanging 7.5 on the Patriots and everybody else is 7, I'm hanging that half point for a reason. It's not a mistake. I want the guy to bet the other side. And if he wants to bet the other side and he wins, great. You won, man. Like, maybe I'll get you next week. Maybe I won't. And that becomes the role of what we do, in bookmaking and sports betting. But now, like the guys, it's an accounting practice, and there's a bet ticker, and you pay 10 guys to sit there, and somebody bets, plus 120 when everybody else was plus 110. Oh, I'll get rid of him, without even a thought, because he's an advantage better. We're going to lose money on him. It's hard. I choose my words carefully. It's become an accounting practice for sportsbooks, and in many ways, rightly so. There's many syndicates out there that are creating fake accounts. They'll have 10 or 15 guys sitting there, at different sportsbooks, just waiting for lines that are, considered advantage, because there's so many thousands of derived markets added now. You can't manage every single one. You have a third-party provider giving you those. It goes to me limiting on events. We go back to the fall where I forget which book it was, but the guy who was able to get down $9,000 in 3 bets in 10 seconds on a same game parlay that was off. The price was off by $20. It got unnoticed all day. He won $250,000, something like that, and Wasn't noticed all day by anybody in the trading department. He went to withdraw, and then the accounting department found it and said, well, that's bad line. Well, that's just mismanagement as far as I'm concerned in the trading department, just complete mismanagement. Because it's so easy now, as I keep saying, that the feed providers and the service providers, they're massive, and they're offering so many different types of bets, and they don't even have the kind of management in a lot of the stuff that they're offering that people can get in and get down on bad lines. There's a difference between an advantage better. Like I say, if I'm hanging a half point on a line, I'm hanging it for a reason. If somebody wants to come in and take it, great. You win. I'm not limiting you. No way. If you want to come in and bet a WNBA first half where we're off by 3 points because the provider was slow, that's a different story, because you got 10 friends that hit it at the same time. But again, it goes to sports books that will allow people to get down $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 on a WNBA first half line. Why would you do that? That is just complete mismanagement. So there's a whole question here, Steve, to the thing, and it's somewhat complex, but I see some very easy ways to nip this in the bud. But that's just my opinion.
And Amanda, when you listen to Phil, it sounds obviously it's more complex than the grocery store.
Yeah, what I know about sports betting is like this much compared to like Phil. But what I can say is, back in my Unibet days, every week I would take a look at we called it wise guy activity, right? So the wise guy activity, and then I'd have to hop on the phone with my sportsbook guy and talk about reducing limits for some of them, because what operator likes a winning customer? It's the sort of unfortunate, I say this, fully tongue in cheek. It's the unfortunate part of this business that you have to let them win sometimes, right? But it's the same thing on the casino side. You're not giving bonuses out to your winning customers. What business sense does that make? So, it'll be interesting to see where this discussion goes. But again, with the AGA having just launched its big RG campaign, and a lot of those operators are going to be part of it, it'll be interesting to see how much the limit setting and the RG kind of start bumping up together as well.
I think Phil,
yeah, sorry, go ahead, Steve. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, Phil, I read somewhere this morning, but before we hopped on here, about again that limiting customers will force those customers to go play with offshore books, and again, I'm not in the loop on whether
that is a reality, and it's the same issue we have up here in Ontario too. We still have some really well-known operators who've chosen not to get licenses, and you don't have to do all the checks and balances that all the rest of the operators have to do who have licenses. Way easier to play with them, because they're not going to ask for your driver's license or your whole bunch of personal information.
I don't know that it would be absolutely for sure. I don't know that it's going to be unless it's a really small player, your regular Joe Better. It's guys that are looking to get down large amounts, and because offshore and the great, they have the crypto, they have the paperhead and stuff like that. So I don't know that your next door neighbor, because he was treated badly by FanDuel, he's going to go play at Curacao online. I would doubt that. I think what we will see, as we have in Europe, is a consolidation of deposit limits and bet limits for a month, and mandatory checks on how much a person that has bet in a month, which we do not have now. We don't have that.
That's the affordability, I think, that's starting to come into North America.
Yeah, I mean, it's really kind of there. Yeah. It's kind of there with sign up now. You have to provide proof of income, but that I know many licensed sports books that kind of skirt that. He's fine. He's going to be all right. And let's take him to a Jays game. But that's another story. It will come here, absolutely. I think it's going to take a couple of years, but as I was saying last year and before, and that there will be. It's going to, as governmental involvement comes in, people complain. They allow me to lose this much money. You're going to have ministers and state representatives standing up. What? Huh? You let this guy get down $250,000 on the Eagles game? Are you kidding me? So I think we're going to see a standardization of limits. You're not going to be able to take those 6-figure bets anymore. You're not going to be able to get in, deposit, $30,000 or $50,000 in a week and stuff like that. You will see, it's going to take a while, obviously, the harmonization and get the books involvement, but it's going to be forced at some point. It will be forced upon them, as it has been in Europe.
Hey, I want to finish with the introduction last week south of the border of the supporting affordability and fairness with every bed act. That's a mouthful. That'll probably be the first and last time I say that. I guess, Amanda, in essence, what it is a couple of U.S. senators proposing that states that want to introduce legal gambling would have to get approval from the U.S. Attorney General, and then there are some pretty restrictive or restrictions around advertising, and they're proposing a ban on live betting. And I think I already know what the answer will be from you and Phil on that. Banning prop bets from student athletes in an NCAA games, and we've already seen some states put those bans into place. I think, Amanda, you've had a chance to read some of the coverage of the SAFE Act. And the reason I want to bring it up is we've had the discussion before about the role of the federal government in this, and we know right now that there is a bill in the Senate to have a National Framework Act around sports betting advertising, and like I said, that's why I wanted to bring it up here with you and Phil.
Yeah, I mean, my personal opinion, but it would be an opinion shared by a lot who work in this industry, is, governments really don't belong in the day-to-day operations of many industries. It's not just, gambling, liquor sales in the province of Ontario, for example. Like, great arguments to be had that they can hand this off to third parties who can do it way better. It's the challenge with banning activities that have already been available to customers. And it's a really fine line that anyone has to walk when they're looking at doing that. And it's one of the reasons when Ontario opened, you saw so many different products that were admissible into the market, because the AGCO understood that Ontario, having been a gray market pre-regulation for so long, you can't take something away from a customer that they were enjoying and using and paying for, and all of a sudden, removing it, because then they will just go seek it from an unregulated operator. So that's part of the reason Ontario is, DFS and esports and all this other stuff came into it. I think, again, taking away an activity that was previously legal or previously available is going to be very challenging. You do run the risk of making customers go find it somewhere else. Affordability limits, I know it was a bit of a controversial thing in Europe, especially in the UK, but coming over to North America, I guess as more states seek to open as well, I think there probably will be an argument made in favor of just making sure that if people are opening accounts and they're making deposits, then you're making sure that that's not their food money or their rent money or their, kids, whatever money that they're using to gamble. So, I see that as probably having a few more legs than other things that they may want to do.
Phil?
Yeah. Because our industry is so unique, and I think, as right now, kind of a target on it for sure, absolutely, more so than say gambling or alcohol or tobacco or anything like that, especially alcohol. I mean, if you go into the LCBO, is anybody checking? If you want to go buy $1,500 of wine, is anybody checking to see if you've been in an addiction program or anything like that? So I mean, it's easier to target us because of what's happening. I think really the answer to me is event limits. Why? I mean, even if somebody, see, I have this thought, so affordability limits. So say the guy's a millionaire, he can afford to bet whatever he wants. If he's trying to get down $250,000 online on an NFL football game, that's whether or not he can afford it, that's a problem. Do you not agree? I mean, like, it's no longer recreational. What do we taking Drake as every customer? I mean, so I think that to me, that's the answer is event limits and clearly transparent limits. Like we're allowed to take this much on a game, and that's how much you can bet. And if you win, great. If you lose, sorry, too bad. I mean, reasonable limits. Like I don't think There's no way a regular person should be able to go online to, one of the big books and bet, $250,000 on a football game. To me, that's wrong. And that's irresponsible. Now I could, I could be disputed on that, and I have been, but that's irresponsible to me.
Hey, Amanda, we're going to give the last word to you. You're off to SBC Lisbon next week, and I'm just curious what you're looking forward to, and this is
trying not to get lost, Steve.
Well, I was going to mention, Amanda, my wife and I are going to Portugal at the end of October, so I'm hoping you're going to bring me back some tips for some good places to dine in Lisbon.
Yeah, I've never been before either. And I think I'll be arriving around the same time as Troy Ross. So we'll try and band together to figure out what we're doing. But it sounds like they've got things really well set up that you can like pick up your pass in the airport. We tried to find a hotel that could get us out to the massive conference center. I think it will, congratulations to my friends at SBC for getting this off the ground. I'm really interested to see the size and the scope. I think it's going to be enormous. I think it's going to be full of a lot of really excited people. But to be quite honest, Steve, I'm showing up to chair some of the payment sessions on the third day. But other than that, I'm going to basically be a tourist at the show. I will be wandering around, just taking it all in and just,
You're not going to be on every panel going.
I know.
Every panel I walked into, Amanda was on there.
So yeah, I'm gonna basically be a tourist, just trying to find people and things, and yeah.
Yeah, we should also mention too that next week's conference will be Sue Schneider's Swan Song from SBC. Good friend of the show, and I know a friend of yours, Amanda, for a long time, and. We've already spoken with Sue and Kelly Keane, and we're looking forward to having both of them along with Paris Smith on the podcast at some point to talk about their new initiative, Defy the Odds. That's it for this episode of the Gaming News Canada show. Amanda Brewer, Phil Gray, thanks so much to both of you for coming back. And we kept you a little bit longer than we wanted to, but there's so much to talk about in the industry right now, and we'll certainly we'll get you back on again very soon if that's okay with you both.
Sounds good.
Golf season's almost over, so yeah, we'll wait another month.
Perfect, Phil. Agreed. As always, you can find the Gaming News Canada show at gamingnewscanada.ca and also on the various podcast platforms. You can also follow us on Twitter at gamingnewsca. Thanks again for everybody for joining us and for everyone who supports this podcast, and we'll see you again very soon.
Thank you for listening to the Gaming News Canada show. Sign up for our newsletter at gamingnewscanada.ca. Follow Steve McAllister on LinkedIn. Message Steve if you're interested in being a sponsor or featured guest.